You're probably going to hear it. You're probably going to hear it in my voice this morning that I'm fighting a little bit of a cold. So I apologize if halfway through I've got to pull out a Kleenex and blow my nose. And I'll try not to cough into the mic too much for you all this morning. But as I woke up this morning and came over here a little bit earlier than I normally do so that admittedly I could put in slides that didn't get put in throughout the course of the week, I threw on, just some athletic pants and a hoodie and came over and did all those things. My hair was all like crazy looking because I'd just gotten out of bed. And I got home at the end of that, and I'm not going to lie, I did not want to change out of those clothes. That was one of those moments where I was sitting there going, man, why can't we have like a fitness church? To where it's just we come in here and we're all in our fitness gear and that's how we dress every morning. That would be incredible. And then I started thinking, sometimes I just have those mornings where I wake up and I roll out of bed and I throw on athletic shorts or a pair of pajama pants or whatever, which I understand in America, pajama pants are just known as pants that we can wear anywhere and everywhere. Actually walked through the school last week and I think half of the students I saw were just wearing what they call pants, what we would call pajamas. But I have those days where it's like, I don't want to change out of this. This is so comfortable. And then I started thinking, we actually have those days where we don't want to change out of those clothes because we literally just don't want to do anything on that day. Now, maybe it's because we didn't sleep good. Maybe it's because we just want to have a lazy day. Maybe we're feeling sick, all sorts of different reasons. Maybe we just really love those comfortable clothes. But we also just have those days where there is no motivation to do anything. We have those days where there is no emotional fuel tank full that has anything left in it for me to do anything. You probably know what I'm talking about, that you may go through days or stages at a time where it's like, I don't feel it today. Today is, we call it one of those days. Maybe it's we got out on the wrong side of the bed and so we decided to describe it that way. Or maybe it's something a whole lot deeper than that, to where it's actually, no, I am really mentally and emotionally struggling to be able to do anything beyond get out of bed if getting out of bed itself wasn't enough of a struggle in itself. We're in this season that, yes, it's called fall, but we're getting ready for this big, giant celebration where we eat a lot of food that we call Thanksgiving, a time that is not a spiritual holiday, it's not a Christian holiday, but man, it has so much Christian element to it, of a time where we remind ourselves to be thankful for the many blessings that we have in our lives. And then we go straight from Thanksgiving into the Christmas season, a time where in the church is a Christian holiday, where we are reminding ourselves about the gift that was given to us by God through His Son when He came to be among us so that He could one day go to a cross, die for our sins, rise and defeat death, the greatest gift that we could ever receive, and we get to celebrate that. And in the midst of all this, for many of us, there will be family coming and going, or we will be going to family and coming back. And it's this great time of celebration in the midst of what I feel is the most miserable weather season of the year, because I hate the cold. And so it's this nice little respite in the midst of the cold weather and the dreariness of the winter. But I also understand that with all of that excitement, and I think we all understand on some level, that not everybody feels that same excitement. In fact, some people, this is a time of year that reminds them of loss that they've experienced in their life. Or for some, this is a time that reminds them of what they've never been able to have. And so it's a time where, as we walk around and we sing about and we talk about all of these celebrations that are going on and we look forward to all the celebrations, it can be very tempting to do what we do every Sunday morning, or every time we walk through Walmart and we see somebody we know and we don't avoid them in that moment, but when we actually interact with them and the question is asked, how are you doing? And we say, good. When sometimes in reality, we're anything but good. Sometimes in reality, we're anything but doing well. As followers of Jesus, we rest on that promise that he gave us, that peace I leave with you, and my peace I give you, and I do not give it as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. We rest in that promise, even in those moments where we can't answer honestly, I'm doing good. We spent some time last week defining what this peace is that God is talking about, because we know that there are all sorts of different definitions of peace. And so we defined it last week as a state of tranquility or quietness of spirit that transcends all the circumstances around us. That it is not something that we can find or inherit or earn or acquire, but instead it is a gift given to us by Jesus, and receiving a gift of any significance requires relationship. It comes through relationship. That this peace that Jesus is talking about is not just, hey, you feel good all the time. You never have any trials in your life. Nothing of difficulty is going to come across you. I'm going to lift you all out of it. That's not the gift that he is telling us that he's giving. In fact, he says that's what the world promises, but this is what I'm going to promise. I'm not giving you a gift of peace like the world gives. I'm going to give you a different kind of peace. And so as we looked last week, one of the ways that the world promises peace is that we can avoid difficult circumstances in our lives. To have peace, just don't ever find yourself in a difficult circumstance. And if you do, get out of it as quickly as you possibly can. But Jesus, as we follow along in his story that we are a part of, and I don't just mean the story that we find in those 4 gospel accounts, but the story that went from the beginning and will go until the end of time, Jesus tells us that I give you a peace that will transcend the circumstances. Not that you will avoid difficult circumstances, but one that will be that peace that we say it's beyond description. It's indescribable. I can't explain this peace that I have in the midst of what I'm experiencing, but I have it anyway. And we do our best, and of course we point towards Jesus, but ultimately those who haven't experienced it, we can't fully explain what it is, try as we might, because it transcends reasoning to our human brains. We looked at the words of a song that was written in 1873 by a man named Horatio Spafford, a man who had lost everything. He had lost all of his wealth in a fire. He had lost his 4 daughters on a ship. And he wrote those words, "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, you have taught me to say, it is well with my soul." He captured so beautifully this peace that Jesus gives us that is not the way that the world gives it. That though the sea billows roll, I can still say it is well. You don't help me avoid all of the difficult circumstances, but instead, Jesus, you give me peace in the midst of those circumstances. He wrote a second verse to that song that goes like this: though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ hath regarded my helpless estate, and hath shed his own blood for my soul. Though Satan should buffet. Now, I realize that when we look at that word, and especially here in America, when we look at that word buffet, what we think is an all-you-can-eat smorgasbord. Do we not? Like, this sounds amazing. I love Satan, if I'm looking at it from that standpoint. Now, that's one of those things that someone could jump on YouTube and they're going to find, hey, this pastor said he loves Satan, and so that could go viral real fast. So I'm going to need you all to clarify the context of what I just said there. But man, if Satan's saying, hey, here's an all-you-can-eat smorgasbord, that sounds amazing. When you use that word as a verb, though Satan should buffet, it means to attack repeatedly and violently, which actually goes along with a buffet. You go back and you attack that buffet repeatedly and really sometimes violently, just shoveling that stuff down your throat. And at the end of it, how do you feel when you get done with the buffet? You feel miserable. You're sitting there going, that was a glorious experience. That was a huge mistake. I'm going to pay for that for the rest of the day. And depending on where that buffet is, you might be paying for it for the rest of the week. It attacks repeatedly and violently. And Horatio Spafford, in his second verse, he says, though Satan should attack repeatedly and violently, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control that Christ hath regarded my helpless estate. Christ has seen my helpless estate, and he shed his blood for my soul. And then he follows up with that chorus, it is well with my soul. See, the world promises us peace by saying that we can escape all the emotions. Remember, Jesus promised us peace not in the way that the world gives. So the world says, hey, are you suffering from anxiety? We've got a pill for that. We can mask that. We can get rid of that. Are you suffering from depression? We've got a pill for that. We can mask that. We can get rid of that. Are you suffering from anger? We've got a pill for that. We can mask that. We can get rid of that. Or we can drink that away. We can smoke that away. We can, whatever you want to fill in the blank here, we can get rid of that. And while I've made it very clear, I feel that I am not in complete opposition to medication to battle emotional unwell-being, emotional health problems that we have. Church, I also don't believe that Jesus ever intended for that to be the end game to take care of it. Because the reality is, if we're going to depend on medication or drugs or alcohol to take care of the emotions that we have, then we're going to be depending on that for our entire lives. That's not going to remove the emotional unwell-being. What that's going to do is it's going to mask it. And yes, it can be an assistant in getting us to be able to focus where we need to focus, but it won't remove it from us. And so Jesus says instead, I give you peace not as the world gives it, but though trials should come, I'm going to set up a table in the presence of your enemies. I'm going to set up a table, and I'm going to invite you to pull up a chair in the valley that you're in. The psalmist, known by the name of King David, a man who God had anointed as being the next king of Israel. He had anointed his head with oil, saying, you will be the next king of Israel. A man who had been invited into the king's home, had been invited to come into the home with his harp so that he could calm the king's mind of the emotional stress that he was under, of the attacks that the king was under. A man, David, who had been invited, or a boy, I should say, who had been invited into the king's home and become the best friend of the king's son, eventually experienced what it was like to have his enemies pursue him. And the first enemy, physical enemy, that he came in contact with was the king who had invited him into his home. And so David went on the run from the king who was trying to kill him, the king who had become jealous of David, who could see the writing on the wall, if you will, that David was going to be the next king of Israel, that David was being set up by God to succeed him. And the king, King Saul, wanted nothing to do with it. You can read through the stories that, I don't know about you. I've had people who didn't like me. I've never had somebody throw a spear at me. Maybe a physical spear, or a verbal spear, a little bit of a verbal jab, but I've never literally had somebody throw a spear to try and impale me with it. I've never had somebody that I know of anyway try to set up ways to have me killed. Maybe somebody's done that and it was just thwarted. I don't know. But I don't believe that's ever happened. I've had people mad at me. I've had people upset at me. I've had people disappointed in me. I've never had somebody physically try to kill me. But David experienced all of those things. He experienced somebody disappointed with him, mad at him. and physically trying to kill him. And David fled for his life in the process. You fast forward in David's story, and we see that it happens all over again, but this time, instead of the king that had invited him in, it was David's own son turned against him. David's own son found a way to manipulate the people of Israel to love Absalom, his son, more than they loved their king, David. And what resulted in this is David went on the run again, running for his life from his enemies because they were seeking to kill him physically, to assassinate his character, to assassinate his body, trying to get rid of David. In the midst of this, David wrote these words that we know so well, that we've talked about in this congregation multiple times over the course of the past couple years. Words that you've heard sung in secular rap songs. Words that are some of the most quoted in all of Scripture. Even when I go through the darkest valley. Or maybe you've heard the translation, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Only goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read Psalm 23, and I realize I didn't read the first 3 verses of it there, but when I read this section of Psalm 23, I love verse 4, and I love verse 6, and I love the first half of verse 5, or the second half of verse 5. Those parts where he's talking about, I can walk through a valley but fear no danger because I know that God is with me. I know he's going to comfort me. Those pieces that say he's going to anoint my head with oil. Church, if we understand what that means, that's saying that God is choosing us. I know we don't walk around dumping oil on people's heads anymore. That would be weird. But that's what that meant. His cup is overflowing. We do use that phrase. My cup is so full right now, it is overflowing. We love that. Only goodness and faithful love is going to pursue me all the days of my life. Sounds awesome. I'm going to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Yes, absolutely, give me that. But that whole piece about you prepare a table before me, that sounds nice, in the presence of my enemies. Church, I don't know about you. I don't want to eat at that restaurant. Like, can we set a table? Can we put a reservation somewhere else? Because who wants to go and sit and eat surrounded by people who don't like you? Anybody, as you're getting ready for your lunch plans today, going, you're looking at your spouse, you're looking at your kids, like, let's go somewhere today where we're surrounded by people who hate us. People who are going to jeer at us, people who are going to make fun of us, people who are going to walk by and maybe spit on us on their way by, maybe jab us on their way by. Doesn't that sounds comforting and amazing, does it not? No, most of us, we're going to do one of two things. We're going to go home to the comfort of our home or to the comfort of a family member's home around people that, okay, maybe we don't necessarily get along with them, because I realize families don't always get along. But we understand that at the deepest level, most of the time, we care about each other. And we love each other. And while we may pick at one another, man, if somebody else comes at you, I'm going to defend you. Blood is thicker than water, that whole thing. Like, I can make fun of my brothers, but if you say something about them, it is on. Right? Or we're going to go to a restaurant. And if we go to a restaurant, we're going to go to it with people that we enjoy being in the company of. And chances are, we might not want to admit this in a setting like this because we know that we're supposed to love our enemies and we're supposed to pray for those who persecute us. But if the waitress or waiter, if they sit us at a table that is near somebody who we know doesn't like us, we're either going to ask for a different table or we're going to completely ignore them the entire time. At best, we'll give them a courtesy hi, and then we're done. Like there's a wall here, even though they're obviously sitting right there. But Jesus, in his promise to give us peace not as the world gives, actually tells us, no, here's what we're going to do. You're walking through the valley. You're surrounded by your enemies. And we're going to pull up a seat. And we're going to have a meal. And there's going to be all these people around us who don't want to see us enjoy this meal, who don't want us to have a good time together, who don't want you and I to be near one another. Now, it may be that we're at that table, we're in that valley, and that table has to be pulled up there because it's a table that we chose. It's a restaurant that we chose. It's based on some decisions that we made, and that's how we found ourselves in the circumstances that we're in. But it could also be that God is setting up that table in the midst of our enemies because there is something that we need to learn in that process. Or it could be that there is an enemy that we spent 3 weeks sharing the story of who has power, and he isn't letting us go easily. But we can find that even here, at the table, in the presence of our enemies, our hunger can be satisfied and our needs can be met. I forgot to grab you a mic, babe. Sarah she's shared bits and pieces of her own story of kind of battling this enemy that we can find ourselves surrounded by. But I invited her to come up and to share some pieces of that again with you this morning. Because I want us to understand that this is not just theory. This is life. So Sarah, obviously I know your story very well. I think you all know that I know her story very well. That's no secret. But when we moved to Fort Collins, she interviewed for one job out of college, one education position in an area where it is a very challenging place to get a job in the education realm. Interviewed once and got the job. And we were through the moon excited about it. And then you started. Could you tell us a little bit of what happened when you started?
Yeah, so we had just moved, and like I said, fresh out of college. Everyone said, oh, be prepared to sub for a couple years. It's really hard to get in. So I printed off, I think I stood in the church workroom and printed off 15 resumes. I was ready to be in it for the long haul. But as he said, one professional interview, a third grade position in Loveland, Colorado, and I got the job. Which, led to all of the comments of, wow, that's almost a miracle. God must have great plans for you in the education world, which of course fueled my fire more. And then I started, and it didn't start bad. I had a lot of friends at the school. My principal was really supportive. I had a lot of really good people there. But it quickly turned into, I started to struggle. I was a first-year teacher. I was trying to get through, right? And I was trying to learn. And there was one person in particular who, as Justin was saying before, as far as he's experienced people maybe not liking him. Well, to be honest, I'm sure I've had people in my life that don't like me. I have never experienced the hate and disdain I experienced that year from this woman that I was supposed to be team teaching with. And needless to say, I started the year on fire. And we had a plan. Justin and I had a plan. I would teach 5 or 6 years, get some years under my belt, maybe, get some income in the bank before we started a family. And then we both wanted me to stay home. We felt like it was God's plan for our family. I was really excited about it. Our mothers both mostly stayed home. And being in the ministry life, we really felt that was important. And so we had the plan, right? We had the plan going. Well, without rehashing the entire year, because it wasn't completely horrible, but it was really, really dark. It was dark. If you were not here 4 years ago, if you did not hear the story, I would be more than happy to tell you about it, because it's not a secret. It's just there's a lot there. So by spring, in Fort Collins, or in Loveland, and in that area, they released every probationary teacher because of budget cuts. You were invited to reapply for your job, all that business. Well, I couldn't find the heart to do it. I mean, I was crushed. I was lost. This passion that I had just mere months before, I didn't hate teaching and I didn't hate my kids. I had an amazing class. I had amazing parental support. I had an amazing principal. It's just a darkness had seeped in there, and I had fear and I had anxiety, and I couldn't bring myself to apply for another job. And so I subbed. I mean, and I had a list of 10 jobs. I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, and I'd be so much happier. I mean, I was ready to give up education altogether. But I didn't. I subbed, and we decided that, why not? We're broke. We're broke. We're babies. Why not have a baby? That sounds really bad. But
When you're broke and one of you is part-time and that's your only employment, that's a great time to start a family and buy a house.
in a very expensive place to live. Not that it was a mistake. It was totally planned, and we conceived right away. We had Keely, and thus began my life as a stay-at-home mom. And I don't know how much farther you want me to go. Do you have more?
Well, in the course of that year, so I would just ask you, how many times did you want to quit?
Oh my gosh. I think what really threw me off was this particular person that I was with was an amazing support. We went to all those pre school year meetings, and she was gloating on her brand new, fresh out of college team teacher. She was so excited about it, and at the first sight of me showing struggle, she completely changed. And I get it. I was struggling, and maybe there's something there. Maybe I deserve some of it. I don't know. But it was a complete flip. She avoided me. She refused to team teach with me anymore. I mean, just so many things there that I just, again, confusion, self-doubt. What is going on? So needless to say, multiple times I wanted to quit, and Justin would say, I forget the exact wording, but I wasn't eating. He would hold me in our apartment, just pray over me overnight, because I just didn't want to go back the next day. And he would say, well, he's like, if you give up now, you'll regret it. Don't give up, don't give up, don't give up. Many, many times I wanted to give up, and he knew God was using him to show me there's more here. Just don't give up. And you have people. He would point out the people at the school that I had in my corner, and I did have a lot. It's just I had a hard time seeing through that. When you're in a classroom with one person, and that made it hard to see that most days.
What we prayed a lot for that year, honestly, was that God would remove it. That this relationship with you and the teacher would be restored, that your confidence would be restored. And through the course of the year, what we found is that it wasn't. It was repeatedly, and you can speak to it or you can just nod your head, either one. But we just found that we would pray for it, and then the next day you would go back in and be knocked back down again.
Yeah, and I would say by spring, like by the first of the year, I mean, I was starting to find my bearings, and I was really starting to enjoy, again, what I was doing. But the relationship with her never restored. Her treatment of me never. And what she would say to me is, she said, this is the easiest time in your life. What are you going to do when you have a family and you're trying to do this? How are you going to succeed when you have a family to take care of? And you can't even handle it now. And that attitude never went away with her. She never quite recovered from that relationship. Our relationship never recovered enough to where even in the spring, even as it was approaching, spring break, where they said we would find out, kind of what our next year would look like, I knew I couldn't do it in that setting at the very, very least. And so it never fully turned around.
Thanks, babe. What we learned over the course of that year is that if we don't fight the right enemies, if we don't recognize who the enemy really is, we will not win. We prayed a lot over the course of that year, like I said, that God would remove in any way, because we didn't even necessarily give him the here's how we want you to remove it. We just want it removed. Like, we don't have the answer. Just please fix this in some way or another. And yet, through the course of the year, it didn't. And you heard her share that at the end of the year, they released every first-year teacher, every probationary teacher, which was 1 to 3 years in that district. Every single one of them was let go for budget reasons, which is just crazy even now to think of it, that God did eventually find a way to pull us out of that, to take us out of the wilderness, but it wasn't in the way that we were looking, and it wasn't in the time frame that we were looking for. What we realized during the course of that year, and especially as we look back on it, is that those enemies that we were in the valley of, it was so easy to think it's this teacher, and if she would be gone, it would all be fine. But really, the enemy had found a way to come at Sarah's confidence, to come at Sarah's belief in her abilities, to increase her anxiety and her fear levels. And truthfully, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, it was working on me too. Because I'm sitting here going, and I know this is chauvinistic, but I'm sitting here going, I'm the man, I should be able to fix this problem for my wife. I should be able to figure this out, and on top of that, I'm a pastor. I should be able to give her the spiritual answer that's going to lift her out of all of this. And church, it wasn't there. God had said, I've got a table set up, and it's right here in the presence of your enemies. See, our church, or our enemy, is not the physical enemies that we often see. We spent 3 weeks talking about that in 1 Peter 5:8. We are told to be aware of our enemy, the devil, because he prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And I know a lion literally devours us as physical beings, but this enemy, the devil, doesn't devour our physical bodies. He devours all of those emotions. He devours that sense of peace. He devours our joy. He takes those and he chews them up and he spits them right back out. And we're told to watch for him. We're told by Jesus in John 10 that the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that you may have life and you may have it to the fullest. I come to give you peace. But I don't bring you peace as the world brings you peace. I don't necessarily just remove you from your enemies. I don't remove you from the difficult times. I don't necessarily heal everything the moment that you ask for the healing. In church, that is hard to understand. There are a lot of people that ask that question, why is he not healing this? Why is he not healing me? Why is he not healing my loved one? Why isn't this done? And especially when it comes to those internal things that we can't even fully describe to somebody. We know sometimes that this doesn't make sense as to why I feel this way. This is irrational why I feel this way, but I still can't pass it up. And so often, we're trying to avoid it or mask it or just push it out of our minds instead of understanding that he might be telling us, no, we're going to walk through it. I'm not going to just take it away. We're going to walk through it. Like I said, sometimes it's of our own making that we're in a difficult spot. But sometimes that peace is being robbed because we are in a spiritual battle. And some of the ways that we learned that we can recognize a spiritual battle when it's happening is that the enemy is going to tell us that we are worthless. And if we are sitting there believing or thinking that we are worthless, that we bring nothing to the table, that is the enemy telling us, no, you don't have anything of value. God will tell you that you are a masterpiece. Then no, you are not perfect yet, but through this big giant word in Christianity that we call sanctification, which is really the process of being made perfect, we can take you along to that stage. That God says, you're right, you don't have a lot to bring to the table. but we can bring you along. The enemy says, don't bother with the table. And God pulls up a chair. The enemy loads you down with guilt. If you're sitting there and the shame on your shoulders is so heavy that you don't feel like you can even be in God's presence or be around others, know that that is an attack from the enemies, because God is not one who loads guilt on your shoulders. He is one who revealed guilt to you through a process we called conviction, but that is a process that pulls us towards God. It doesn't push us away from Him. If there's that moment where you're like, God would never want to be around me, God could never have anything to do with me, church, that is not God telling you that. What God is doing is saying, hey, I've got a chair for you. I'm ready to sit down. I'm ready to eat with you. We've got some things to talk about. We've got some things to work on. We need to change your diet a little bit. But I still want to be near you. The enemy will convince you that you are alone in the battle that you're facing, that there is nobody there for you. And there were days where Sarah absolutely felt alone, but when she was really able to open her ears and to look around her, she saw the principal. She heard some of her team teachers, and I can thankfully say that she was able to hear my voice in the midst of all that. God surrounded us with friends that were there to tell her that, no, you're not alone in this. No, you are not worthless. No, you are not just, incapable of being a teacher, but instead people who would build her up. When we're in the midst of those moments, to have those spiritually mature people who will speak truth into our lives, who will not just tell us that you're perfect and everything's fine, the people who will correct and rebuke, but who will also encourage and love and listen. He surrounds us with those people if we're willing to if we're able, I should say, to open our eyes and to open our ears. The enemy will fill us full of that thing called fear. The fear is not from God. Instead, God is filling us with peace that makes no sense. Peace that in the midst of our enemies attacking us, we're sitting there going, I don't know why. I don't feel good in this moment, but I know that God is still with me. I don't even necessarily, I was having a conversation this morning, I don't even necessarily feel His presence in this moment, but I know that He is there. That's what God is telling us. That's the peace that He is providing us, because the enemy wants us as far away from God as possible. And God is saying over and over and over again, draw near to me and I will draw near to you. Pull up a seat at the table. In fact, He wants to be so near that He sacrificed His place on a throne to come near to you. In the midst of your valley, that He gave up the throne to come to you at your worst moment. Accepting that we are under a spiritual attack, accepting the reality of an attack, church, is not the same as accepting it as acceptable, but it's recognizing the fight that we are truly in. I remember reading or hearing on the radio in 2020 that it was going to be those who would accept that this wasn't going to be over tomorrow, that we're going to be able to make it through that period that we refer to as COVID with their sanity intact. But those who are always thinking tomorrow's the day that I'm going to wake up and it's all going to be fine, the world is going to be back to normal, those are going to be the people who are going to have increased anxiety levels, increased depression levels. But those who will understand that we are in this for the long haul, that this may not be over in a day, a week, or even a year, those are going to be the ones who find peace. The researchers found that it was comparable to those who found themselves as prisoners of war, that it was the prisoners of war who understood that I might not be rescued tomorrow, that I might actually be a prisoner for a while, that were the ones that could come out of being a POW and still find peace in the world that they lived in. But the ones who constantly relied on their hope being in tomorrow, it'll all be fine, were the ones who came back struggling with the hardest PTSD, with the hardest other struggles that we come back with from war. Church, we have to understand, not calling it acceptable, but when we understand, I should say, that God may not lift us out of it in a moment, those are the moments that it becomes possible to weather the storm that we're in, to weather being in the valley. And so this morning, I know that some of us in here are in a valley. I know that some of us in here are feeling like we are surrounded by our enemies. Whether they be we're just looking at the physical enemy, or whether we see that spiritual battle that is going on all around us, we are in a moment where this is more than just I woke up sad this morning. Or this is more than just I've had a couple of rough days, but this is I am being pulled down into something, and I pray that God would just bail me out of this, and He's not doing it. Instead, God seems to be pulling up a table. And He seems to be saying, hey, we're going to sit in this for a little while. I know there's some of us in here in that moment. And if you're not in that moment, my guess is that you know somebody who is. And so this morning, I'm going to invite us to do something. If you're in that moment, I'm going to invite you to grab somebody to intercede for you. It could be somebody near you, it could be somebody all the way across the room. I really don't care. You can grab a staff member, you can grab a friend, you can grab somebody that you've never actually talked to before. And say, hey, I'm in that moment, and I need somebody to pull up a seat at the table with me. I know Jesus is there. I need you there with me too. And if that's not you, then I invite you to pull up a seat at the table with somebody else that you know is in that moment. And I'm not even saying that you have to pull them to that table physically this morning, because you may not want to expose them in that moment that they're going through something. That's their story to tell, not yours. But as we've been sitting here, you've been thinking, I know somebody who's struggling with exactly what he's talking about. Then I would invite you to get out of your seats, because these pews aren't a table. I would invite you to actually come to an altar and to intercede on behalf of that person, whether they're sitting next to you or not. To pray that they would realize that they are able to draw near to God, and that He will draw near to them. Pray that Jesus would remove you, or pray not, I should say, that He would remove you or them from the presence of the enemy, but that instead He can give you or them the gift of peace in the midst of the valley. That they would be able to, or you would be able to sing those words, though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ hath regarded my helpless estate, and has shed His own blood for my soul. That we would be able to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul.